Good morning and welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council's online briefing for community and faith partners. Today's program will feature San Francisco Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing Executive Director Shireen McSpadden, who will address San Francisco's response to homelessness. The San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefings are supported by a grant from MetaFund. Thank you. The important and ongoing work of the San Francisco Interfaith Council would not be possible without generous funding from congregations, corporations, faith-based social service agencies, foundations, judicatories, and supporters like you. Help us spread the word. Visit sfinterfaithcouncil.org to learn about SFIC programming and how to become a supporter. Follow SFIC on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe to SFIC's YouTube channel to watch all of our virtual events. A bit of housekeeping. Today's program is being recorded. For audio and video, all participants are muted and without video to minimize distraction. To submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. Questions will be forwarded to the host and answered, time permitting. To activate closed captions, select the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and click Enable Live Transcription. There's no time like the present for San Franciscans to prepare for changes in the virus by taking basic actions that can protect themselves, their families, and their community. The San Francisco Department of Public Health urges people to be ready for COVID by staying up to date on their vaccinations, knowing how to reach their doctor, keeping a supply of COVID tests, keeping masks handy, planning ahead for a possible infection, and staying informed with trusted sources of information such as sf.gov/COVID. The San Francisco Department of Public Health recommends the following for keeping congregations safe during COVID. Continue to gather. Keep in mind your congregation's demographics, encourage vaccines and boosters, wear masks indoors, reinforce the stay at home if sick message, provide testing resources, and share Be COVID Ready messaging found at sf.gov/be-covid-ready. For more information, call 628-652-2700. The COVID vaccines are safe and effective and open to everyone 6 months and older, boosters to everyone 5 months and older, and the updated booster to everyone 12 years and older. Mpox vaccines and boosters are now available to those exposed and to certain eligible groups. Go to sf.gov for more information on vaccines. Now is the time to come together, San Francisco. Together we can stop Asian discrimination, bias, hate, and violence. The COVID-19 virus has no race or nationality. It is simply a disease. To report a hate crime, call the SFPD at 415-553-1133. And at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Trey. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this week's online briefing for community and faith partners. In 1988, San Francisco Mayor Art Agnos appealed to our city's faith leaders to help respond to an emerging homeless crisis. More specifically, he asked them to open their doors, provide shelter, a home-cooked meal, and kindness during the winter rainy season to those who, for a variety of complex reasons, called the streets their home. What initially began as a one-year emergency shelter is now entering its 34th year, and was the impetus for the formation of the San Francisco Interfaith Council. For its part, the Interfaith Winter Shelter, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and operated by Episcopal Community Services, coordinates with 4 faith-based facilities and over 50 congregations and affiliated organizations to feed and shelter between 60 and 100 clients daily, from the Monday before Thanksgiving until the end of March. The need for our shelter and the myriad of others affirms that San Francisco's homeless challenges have not subsided. To address the core issues of homelessness, key components of its strategic planning process, new key initiatives, and how faith communities can be part of the solution, San Francisco Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing Executive Director Shireen McSpadden will be this week's online briefing for community and faith partners featured presenter. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Minister of Celebration at Glide Church and San Francisco Interfaith Council's newest board member, Marvin K. White, who will read the interfaith statement and ground us in a reflective moment. Marvin, welcome. It's wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Michael, and good morning, everyone. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as a people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. I remember once Glide hosted a national conference called Ministry for the Poor. Church leaders from around the country came for what would be both a transformative and practical time together. Participants served meals, came to a mini church celebration, and walked the Tenderloin in order to experience what it means to be with the poor, to come to an understanding about what it means to be in relationship with all of creation, but particularly the most vulnerable. They got to imagine what it must be like to be poor. They got to imagine what it must be like to be hungry. They got to imagine what being treated with dignity for the first time feels like. They got to imagine, and then they got to go home. Visitors also participated in Glide's recovery circles. While recovery models are usually reserved for those who are dealing with substance addiction disorders, the recovery circle that day, where these clergy and faith leaders sat, became a place in which their addiction to privilege and inaction was being called out, and they resisted. One clergy leader went as far as to say that the anti-poverty work, the feeding work, the social services work that they were getting a glimpse of is a model that could only happen at Glide. And when they said this kind of program could only happen at Glide, what I heard was them saying that their community does not recognize broken bodies. Their community of faith don't see poor people, so therefore poor people don't exist. What she was saying was that she refuses to know what Glide teaches you. You have to first admit that there is something wrong personally and systemically. Only then you will know that the hungry are not your problem. They are your solution. By saying that this model could only happen at Glide, you turn a blind eye to a God who instructs you to care for the poor. When you say that, you cherry pick from the Lord's Prayer, yes, our Father who art in heaven, but no, don't let your kingdom come to the suburbs. We just got new hardwood floors. Because the kingdom means everybody is fed, everybody has equal access to joy and love and peace and security. When you say that a meals program like this can only happen at Glide, you choose the status quo over opening your doors to vulnerable communities. You show the world that you're interested in poor people staying hidden, and when you say that, you're against the poor, not with them. We must become responsible. We must come to understand that the poor people are not weeds you keep at bay with herbicides and pesticides in order to keep your grounds pretty. No, open your doors now. Open your doors to artists now, community organizers now, teachers now, and homeless folks now. Open your doors to the noise that your double pane soundproof stained glass windows tries desperately to keep out. Let them in. And maybe letting the Christ out and the people in is where the new church is, somewhere in between. Maybe the poor are the richest soil ever. Maybe the poor are smack dab in the middle of the church and state. Maybe the poor are the new and rich permaculture of ideas and possibilities and stories. You have to stop thinking that this can only happen at Glide. Amen.
Amen. And bless Glide for feeding over 1 million people in San Francisco every year. Bless Glide for what it does. And it is a model to be emulated, as you so eloquently stated in your reflection. Thank you, Marvin. You know, as I sit in my office, I look up at a map that was provided by the Department of Planning. And on that map, there are 800 little dots. And those dots are the communities of faith and religious institutions in San Francisco. And it's in our DNA to do good. It's in our DNA to help those in need. And we do. And we do. We don't do it alone, though. We work in collaboration with our civic and NGO partners. And we are very blessed to have with us today the Director of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, Shereen McSpadden, who I've had the privilege of working with as a commissioner of hers when she led the Department on Aging and Adult Services. But I know her also as a person of great faith, a person whose father was a Methodist minister, and someone who understands how communities of faith can work with our civic partners to be part of the solution. I've invited Shereen here. The last time she was on this program, she was the DOS director. This is, I believe, the first time she is joining us as Director of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. She regularly speaks with the CEOs of the faith-based social service agencies that we convene, and they have some questions that they will be asking of Shereen later in this program. But Shereen, it's wonderful to have you. We're here to learn today, and we are here to partner. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that introduction. And Marvin, it's always inspiring to hear your words, and it was such a treat to hear you speak this morning. So thank you. I will be sharing a slide presentation with you this morning. I'm going to start by talking about kind of where the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing is right now. We've had a number of investments over the past couple of years, and we've learned a lot from COVID. Just want to go through some of that, and then I know that Michael will be following up with some questions for me. So here we go. So I just want to, on the first slide here, the title slide, talk a little bit about, I've been with the department just about a year and a half. And I have to say, homelessness is in San Francisco and probably everywhere is an incredibly complex topic, no matter how you look at it. And so I've spent the last year and a half learning from my staff, learning from people experiencing homelessness, learning from our provider community. And I'm very thankful that we've got such experts in the room because this is a really complex issue. I'm going to today give you some updates on key budget investments and an update on our department's strategic planning process. And also, I want to discuss the ways that faith communities can engage in addressing homelessness in San Francisco, both the ways that many of you already are and other ways that you can in the future. So moving on to the next title slide, budget highlights. This year's budget includes some new important investments and programs to address homelessness. So moving on to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the significant equity investments we've made across our permanent supportive housing portfolio to improve our supportive services and better support nonprofit partners, and then make critical capital improvements. In the mayor's budget this year, the budget that was then passed by the board, there's a $67.4 million investment over 2 years to support the city's permanent supportive housing buildings. We also call that PSH, by investing in increased staff wages, enhanced services, and improvements to capital infrastructure across our portfolio, with a particular focus on the older, what we call legacy portfolio. So we've got a number of buildings that we've had for years in our portfolio, and then we're bringing on a lot of new ones. And we're really trying to focus on making sure that our older buildings are brought up to, that we can modernize them. And also we're really looking at wage equity in our system. We know that, it's really critical. The workforce is really, really critical, and nonprofit wages aren't as good as they should be. And this work takes a lot of expertise. It takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of empathy, all of those things. And so we're really trying to look at that. We've got $30 million over 2 years dedicated to increasing wages for our nonprofit staff who provide supportive services and property management across our project-based permanent supportive housing portfolio. $32.4 million over 2 years that we've invested in legacy housing sites to provide increased levels of case management services, which is consistent with our newer programs. And then $5 million in one-time funds to support capital improvements to our existing buildings to address things like accessibility and safety and overall desirability. Over the last 2 years, the city has leased or acquired over 2,500 new units of permanent supportive housing, which is the largest expansion in 20 years. We have in the fiscal 2022, 23, and 23, 24 budgets focused on ensuring equity across our portfolio. Next slide. Our budget also includes historic investments and strategies to end homelessness and provide housing subsidies for transgender and gender nonconforming residents who face barriers to housing, services, and employment. This transgender community is uniquely at risk of homelessness, violence, and poverty. These investments are critical to advancing the city's equity strategies to improve services for our most vulnerable community members. Our department, in partnership with the Office of Transgender Initiatives, has developed a plan to provide permanent exits out of homelessness for transgender and gender nonconforming residents by leveraging our Prop C dollars over the next 2 years to provide at least 150 permanent supportive housing subsidies through the city's flexible housing subsidy pool program or future federal emergency housing vouchers. And then we've dedicated funds to acquire and operate a 50 to 80 unit permanent supportive housing building specifically for transgender and gender nonconforming youth. There's an additional $6 million in general fund investments over 2 years to build capacity among our nonprofit providers who serve transgender and gender nonconforming residents and fund short-term or shallow rental subsidies and provide flexible financial assistance. Next slide. In addition to focusing on housing solutions, our budget also includes new resources to expand and enhance temporary shelters. So we have $25 million in anticipated new state homeless funding to support a portion of operating costs over the next 2 years for approximately 410 shelter beds in a semi-congregate or non-congregate setting. These sites are located at the Baldwin Hotel and 711 Post Street Shelter. And then $7 million in one-time funds to build a new non-congregate cabin site serving up to 70 guests in the Mission. And, you know, one of the things that happened during COVID when we were able to put together a number of shelter-in-place hotels, and I'm sure people have read about those, and our response to COVID was really we had to think about ways to separate people. So our congregate shelter system didn't work in the way that we used to rely on it. It was really about getting people away from each other, not spreading COVID more than necessary. And we learned, not surprisingly, that people really like their own space. They like having a door that can shut, and they like being able to have the peace and quiet that comes with their own room. And so we've really been mixing it up a little bit. We've been really looking at what we call non-congregate shelter as kind of the new way that we do shelter. We definitely need our kind of legacy big congregate sites as well, because we just don't have enough beds in the system to totally switch over. But that's really what we're looking at as we move into the future. So next slide. We are in the process of developing a citywide strategic plan. And while these new investments that I've mentioned are critical to expanding our capacity to meet the needs of the community, we also need to develop our strategic plan to address the crisis in the community. The Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing had a 5-year strategic framework that is expiring this year, and we're in the middle of our planning process for our next 5-year plan to guide our work and investments. So in the next slide, in 2022, we launched a comprehensive process to develop a new citywide strategic plan to respond to and prevent homelessness and advance equity for people experiencing homelessness in San Francisco. We're using data, proven practices, and city partners and community feedback to design a homelessness response system that will help people exit homelessness and prevent them from losing housing. This is the first strategic plan on homelessness in San Francisco that will describe a citywide collaborative vision for responding to homelessness with a comprehensive set of shared goals, strategies, and intended outcomes that will work to advance equity decrease and prevent overall homelessness and decrease unsheltered homelessness. I mean, one of the things that I really envision with this is that, while our department is responsible for addressing homelessness and we're the one department that, where that's our sole mission, there are a number of other departments in the city, and there are a number of other community providers, faith communities, individuals who have experienced homelessness who need to be part of our plan. And we need to be collaborating in a way that we have not before. We often, in San Francisco, as small as we are, and the fact that we're city and county and all of that, we still often operate in silos, and we need to really think together and very collaboratively about how we're addressing homelessness. Not surprisingly, homelessness disproportionately harms groups who have been historically discriminated against and systemically excluded from opportunities to thrive by systems built on structural racism and injustice such as housing, employment, education, and health. And this is why the driving force of the strategic plan is the pursuit of racial and housing justice. Just to give you an example, our homelessness population in San Francisco is about 40% of the population of people experiencing homelessness is identifies as African American, and about 5% of our overall population identifies as African American or Black. And so there's just a huge disproportionality there. And there are many other examples with other groups that are disproportionately affected. So our plan will have explicit equity goals to advance equitable outcomes and respond to inequities across our systems for people most disparately impacted by homelessness in San Francisco. People who are Black, who are Indigenous, Latinx, LGBTQIA+, in order to respond to the impacts of structural racism and historic injustices. This plan will center the experiences of people with lived experience of homelessness who are being served by or need access to the homelessness response system. The planning process will provide new and resourced opportunities for the meaningful participation of people with lived expertise in the design of the planning process and the development of the overall plan. Homelessness is a complex issue, as I mentioned before, that has a known and widely proven solution: permanent housing and support services. With the kind of skyrocketing housing market we have here in San Francisco, the solutions to homelessness cannot be implemented by one agency or multiple siloed systems. So next slide. So phase one of our planning process is largely completed. That was included a data analyses and system performance goals, completing the coordinated entry evaluation and launching the redesign process. And coordinated entry is the way that people access our housing system. It is very controversial. And I think, what I've seen since I got to the department is that we really need to redesign it so that it actually can capture nuances and the different needs of individuals entering our system. And so we are completing that we have completed that evaluation, and now we're launching a redesign process for that system. We also building the new HSH Planning, Performance, and Strategy Division, which is really exciting because I think without a good planning division, it's really hard to be organized and to really do strategic planning in the way that you need and to really capture the data that you need to make good decisions and think about how you're going to move the needle. Partnering with national and local homelessness experts to develop the strategic plan and implement an innovative new model for conducting community engagement by hiring people with lived experience. So we've embarked on most of those things already. And then phase two, which is just underway now, is community and stakeholder engagement, engaging people with lived expertise of homelessness on the development of the plans, goals, and strategies, symptoms and financial modeling of how to right-size the interventions that are most effective and responsive to people's needs, city department collaboration on shared goals and strategies, and then drafting and the overall approval process. Next slide kind of shows the timeline. So from July to August 2022, we completed a detailed planning design and work plan development. Now from September to December, we're in the implementation of planning processes and community engagement. November to January, we'll be drafting the plan content, framing information, strategies, and activities. And then in January, we'll initiate external education and our support processes. So next slide, we are reaching out to various departments to focus our planning conversations on particular departmental programs and investments. We're already engaging with several departments on planning processes to ensure that the vision set forth in this plan has support from all departments impacting the lives of people experiencing homelessness. We work very, very closely with the Department of Public Health. Again, homelessness is very complex. There are a lot of people who have or are dealing with behavioral health issues, substance abuse disorders, chronic illness, those types of things. We also are working closely with the Department of Public Works because they work with us on, when we're engaging people on the street. We work with the fire department. We work with Human Services Agency, both with the Department of Disability and Aging Services and Benefits and Family Support. And so all of those partnerships need to be really spelled out in this plan, in my opinion, because we need to have shared goals and we need to measure our success against the goals that we set. Next slide. So community liaisons who are hired and trained individuals with the lived experience of homelessness are participating in the design of our plan and conducting engagement with people experiencing homelessness and the larger stakeholder and provider communities to solicit input on our plan. So the ways that they're engaging are surveys and focus groups with people with lived experience, input sessions with provider organizations, and then interviews with community leaders. And then coordination and input discussions with key bodies. So HSH has a strategic framework advisory committee who is made up of providers who are working with us in kind of helping advise us on the strategic planning process. We've got the local homeless coordinating board, our city, our home oversight committee, which is the Prop C committee, providers of color groups, and then other entities. So we have kind of laid out some key planning topics, the first being advancing toward racial and housing justice. We have specific equity and justice focused activities, but we'll also be ensuring that we center a focus on equity within and across all of our planning topics. We're improving system performance, capacity, and accountability. This includes coordinated entry redesign, as I mentioned before, data-focused strategies, capacity building and sustainability, performance management and accountability structures, and other system strengthening activities. We're going to work on addressing unsheltered homelessness, focusing on the health and behavioral health, services, shelter, and housing needs of people who are unsheltered, as well as the community impacts and neighborhood concerns regarding unsheltered homelessness. And then enhancing temporary and crisis services options, focusing on strengthening and expanding shelter options across a full range of models. Increasing permanent housing outcomes, which means really focusing on strengthening our rehousing and housing first practices and on creating more permanent housing options. And then preventing people from experiencing homelessness in the first place, ranging from problem solving services for people at the very cusp of homelessness to other homelessness prevention and eviction prevention strategies. So moving on to faith community engagement. In addition to sharing these updates with you, I also want to have a conversation with all of you about the ways that the faith community can be part of the work to prevent and end homelessness in our community. So next slide. The San Francisco Interfaith Council and Episcopal Community Services have partnered with the city for as many years as Michael told us earlier to operate the Interfaith Winter Shelter. And we're deeply grateful to all the faith communities involved in this effort to provide critical food and shelter to people during the coldest months of the year. I mean, that is such a critical program. And I want to just thank all of you who are involved in it. If your congregation is interested in getting involved with this program and you're not, please reach out to Michael. We always welcome new partners. And, I hate to say this, but we can never get enough shelter during the winter. And then just going into some additional opportunities. In addition to the Interfaith Shelter, there are many ways, large and small, that your congregation can get involved. So many faith communities have buildings, land, or other assets that can be developed to build much needed affordable housing. And we've got some really good examples of that around the city. You may have parking lots that can be used to provide safe parking for people living in their vehicles. You can help promote food security among people experiencing homelessness or in our housing programs by raising resources to support meal vending machines or other innovations in food security. We know, one of the things that often happens is we think that once people move into permanent supportive housing, that they are, then they're fine, but people are still living in poverty. And we know that food security is a huge issue in permanent supportive housing. And so we're really trying to figure out ways that we can better support people with food security resources. We're regularly proposing new shelters and housing throughout the community. We often face significant community resistance to these projects, and we would love to work with you to raise awareness about these projects and build community support for these housing and shelter projects. It's always dismaying to me when I'm in these community meetings and people say, oh yeah, we understand people need housing, but not in my neighborhood. This isn't the right place. We have families, we have seniors, we have, whatever. And, I always try to remind people that people experiencing homelessness are families, they are children, they are transitional age youth, they are older people, and, they're part of our community. And what's been very clear is that when we're in these community meetings and there are people in the meeting who are kind of there to say, hey, my faith community is right here, and we welcome this this new building, we welcome our new community members, and we actually are a part of the community and engaged in the community. It makes a big difference. So that's it's an important way to engage. And then at the end here, I've just got some discussion questions for you. How do you see your faith communities getting involved? How can the city better support your faith community to engage? Is there something your community has done that you would recommend to others? And then how would you recommend that we engage the faith community in our strategic planning process? And I just want to thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Michael.
Shireen, thank you so very much. And we know that your work is not easy work, but it's blessed work and it's important work. In addition to our work with the shelter and having been the funder of the First Navigation Center, one of the key programs that the Interfaith Council has spearheaded since 2008 is to convene the CEOs of the major faith-based social service agencies. Back during the Great Recession, their budgets, if they were doing business with the city, as you remember, were being cut 30%. And so staff and programs just disappeared. And then came tech. And the complexion of the city changed radically. Those budgets have never been fully restored, but the rents were going sky high, and a lot of these agencies were being forced to relocate and losing staff and trying to meet the needs of the city. So we are very proud of this convening. It continues to this day, and we asked the CEOs of a number of these organizations if they had questions for you. And so I will, on their behalf, offer these questions. The first is from Nils Banke, Chief Executive Officer of the St. Anthony Foundation. And he says, it would be great to hear from Shireen what she believes are the learnings for the city and for all of us, really, from the Linkage Center project.
Sure. So that's a great question. And the Tenderloin Emergency and the Tenderloin Center, or what we called the Linkage Center, has been really helpful in providing a safe and dignified place for people living unsheltered in the Tenderloin to go to access a variety of services. The emergency declaration was essential to setting up the facility quickly, and it was clear from the demand at the TLC, as we called it, that people are in need of a place to go to use safely and have an ability to more easily access a variety of services, including substance use treatment, shelter, and housing. And so it really, that emergency kind of forced departments to come together and to really respond to the needs of the people in the community. We ultimately, I think it's in a tough location. And as things like the theater come back and all that stuff, it's a location that probably isn't ideal, especially since we have so many people coming there. So we want to build upon the success of the Tenderloin City and Center, and the city is pursuing a strategy of several smaller, what DPH is calling wellness hubs, that can co-locate services along the continuum in a drop-in setting, and also provide overdose prevention services, access to treatment, housing, and benefits, all of which can improve health and reduce a person's risk of overdose. So while we did this one big thing, we realized we were seeing people come not just from the Tenderloin, but from other neighborhoods. And we want to be able to really locate these sites and have them be much smaller in the various neighborhoods where we know there are lots of people experiencing homelessness, and not just homelessness, because there were people who came who weren't, but who really needed the other services that were offered there. So that's kind of the plan for the next phase.
Thank you. Dr. Ellen Hammerly, who's the new Chief Executive Officer for Catholic Charities of Marin, San Francisco, and San Mateo, says, can you ask Shireen about any plans to improve housing placement speed through increased coordination across city agencies, given the high number of vacant units in San Francisco and the slowness of housing unit inspections and approvals, which causes delays and impedes productive reduction in homelessness?
Sure. Yes, that's been a tough thing to learn about and try to really understand, what the root causes of that are. And we've heard from our providers that there are many reasons. I mean, staffing is challenging right now. I mean, for everyone, for our nonprofits, certainly for our city departments, and the full staffing is really important to be able to keep up with the demand. So we're improving our housing assessment and placement process. It's a really important component of our strategic planning process. We've invested significantly in the expansion of our programs, and we still have more work to do to ensure that they are as efficient and effective at meeting our clients' needs as can be. Reforming our coordinated entry system is critical to improving the housing placement process for clients. Earlier this year, we initiated the first phase of improving coordinated entry with the primary goals of implementing more equitable processes there and increasing access to housing and services of people who've been historically marginalized. One of the things we're really thinking about is, can we use things like presumptive eligibility and move people in and then, kind of catch up with documentation later? I mean, the inspections and approvals process for units is something we're working on, but that's been really challenging. But we also have units that are ready, and documentation sometimes can take a long time. So we're trying to look at different ways to address that issue. We did engage in a third-party evaluation that gathered broad community input and data on our current system. We released our findings in July, and then held 3 public town hall meetings to receive feedback on the findings and the ways to redesign our system. So we intend to, now that we're in the redesign phase, we are engaging in ad hoc multi-stakeholder work groups that are collaboratively working to develop recommendations for redesigning key parts of our system. And hopefully it will work to address exactly what Ellen was asking about there, which is, the slowness of getting units back online. We know that one of the key things that we need to do is really figure out the workforce challenge. As I said earlier, we're working on wage equity, which is a big piece of making sure that our nonprofits have all the people they need in place. I've heard from a number of them that that's one of the big impediments to really moving people in and being able to assess, whether units are ready and all of that stuff is just finding the number of staff they need to really make that happen. And so there's just a number of ways that we're addressing that now, and hopefully we'll see an increase or decrease in the vacancy rate over time. I mean, we did get it down in July, down to below 10%, which is a big improvement from where it was. But we just brought a lot of brand new units online, which is very, very exciting. And that kind of artificially inflates our vacancy rate because we've got so many units that have just come on over the last month and will come on over the next few months.
Thank you. Gia Danilar from Jewish Family and Children's Services says, we at Jewish Family and Children's Services work closely with women and children fleeing domestic violence and refugees and new immigrants, including those now coming from the Ukraine. They do not have secure housing and are often homelessness or at risk of homelessness. What resources does the city currently have to serve these populations? And I would add quickly too, because I know that the San Francisco Interfaith Council is in conversation with the city as it plans for, in anticipation of those who are being sent here because we are a sanctuary city. They're being sent to sanctuary cities. So these are vulnerable populations, people who, just are political refugees, domestic violence refugees. What do you say?
Well, so I'd say a couple different things. I mean, one is the city is gearing up for that, for the likelihood that we may get some buses of migrants coming to San Francisco, since we've been seeing it happen in other parts of the country. And our department isn't specifically the lead on that. That's really the Department of Emergency Management and Human Services Agency. The city does have services for recent immigrants, such as immigration-focused legal assistance and financial assistance for immigration-related costs through the Office of Citizen Engagement and Immigrant Affairs, or as we call it, OCEA. Our department offers outreach, homelessness prevention, emergency shelter and transitional housing, and long-term housing assistance to people experiencing homelessness. We don't take documentation or immigration status into consideration for eligibility for these programs. And if a family is homeless and in need of shelter or housing, they can visit one of our family access points. One of I think what is also embedded in this question is really, what is the approach to working with women and children specifically? And what part of our strategic plan is really to think about that. I mean, our system has been very broad, and we move people into shelter and often don't think about, really what it means for women and children to be in a shelter. Well, we do think about children and families, and we have a family shelter system, but when we have women fleeing violence, I think what we need to do is really think about what it means to address that issue and what the trauma is for women who have experienced that, to actually be in a shelter that has everyone in it, right? And so one of the things that we're really doing in this plan is to think about what are the resources we need to develop, whether it's, either new buildings or supporting some of the ones that we currently have that are for women. And when I say women, I'd say both trans women and cisgender women. And then if we're seeing more of a demand for that, how can we repurpose some of the shelters we have to at least help separate women so that they have a much safer place, so that they feel safer and feel that they have security. So we're kind of trying to figure that out again. I mean, really, really centering people's experiences. And we're learning from people who've experienced our system and experienced homelessness in San Francisco as our experts in redesigning our system.
Mario Paz, the Executive Director of Good Samaritan Family Resource Center, states the following and then asks a question. The recent point-in-time count report reveals that the number of Latino people living in shelters or on the street has shot up 55% in the past 3 years, from 1,524 to 2,357, reflecting what observers say is the disproportionate effect of the pandemic on lower income people of color, many of whom lost service jobs during lockdown. Latinos are now a full 30% of the homeless population, compared with being 16% of the general population, according to the report. At Good Samaritan Family Resource Center, we have experienced this issue firsthand and are struggling to meet the multiple needs of unhoused Latino families that have young children. What strategies is HSH exploring to address this alarming finding? In particular, how can HSH help organizations like Good Samaritan better support homeless families with children?
Yeah, Mario's question is a really good one, and it is an alarming finding. I think the first thing is that we need to engage the Latinx community in addressing this issue, and we are, but that's where the expertise comes from, right? We know that Latinx clients experienced a 55% increase in homelessness since 2019. In comparison, the total point in time count dropped minus 3.5% in the same time period. So this Latinx representation increased to 30% of the homeless population in 2022 compared to 16% of San Francisco's general population. And while the increase in the experience of homelessness among this community is disproportionate and very problematic, we're also seeing an increase in the representation of the Latinx population among those exiting the homeless system to permanent housing. So that has gone up to 30% from 23%. So that's a good thing. But overall, in response to the increase, we're focusing on some critical new investments for the Latinx community and the Mission District. And I want to preface this by saying I'm very well aware, and we're well aware that this community is spread throughout San Francisco, but we are starting with the Mission. We recently reopened the Dolores Street shelter with 53 beds, and we're taking walk-ins specifically from the community. We currently have a coordinated entry existing family access point in the Mission, which is operated by Catholic Charities. We are opening a new adult access point run by Dolores Street Community Services later this month. And then the homeless outreach team has a dedicated Mission team with 2 Spanish-speaking outreach workers. They partner with the day labor program and outreach to that community. We have an encampment resolution team that works closely with the Healthy Streets Operations Center, which is run by the Department of Emergency Management in the Mission. And we have Spanish-speaking team members who were born and raised in the community. We're already partnering with Latinx serving organizations such as Mission Neighborhood Center and others. And then the Mission is also home to the Buena Vista Horace Mann Family Shelter, which is 30 beds, a safe sleep site, which is 40 spaces, and our Division Circle Navigation Center. So it's 120 beds, soon to reinflate to 186. Our 2022-23 budget also funds a 70-unit cabin community in the Mission. We recently purchased and opened Casa Esperanza in the Mission. And that is a building specifically for transitional age youth. I got to attend the opening with Mayor Breed, I guess like last week or the week before, and it was really inspiring. We're trying something new with that to really make sure that we're focusing on Latinx youth. So not anybody can, we're trying to really focus our outreach so that that's who's responding and saying, yes, I want to live here. And it seems to be very successful so far. And so we're going to be using that particular strategy in the future with other buildings when we're trying to really target specific communities and make sure that they're the ones getting those resources. So, and then 2 equity goals already established in our San Francisco state mandated local homeless action plan include increasing the percentage of Hispanic or Latinx populations accessing services while experiencing homelessness to 30% of the total population accessing services by June 30th, 2024, to advance more equitable representation based upon their presence in the homeless population. And then increasing the representation of this population among those exiting the homeless system to permanent housing to 30% from 23. So we're in discussion with the community about ongoing strategies for addressing homelessness among the community. And this again will be a very important part of our strategic plan, and we'll be able to set the goals that I kind of mentioned, but probably other goals as well, and then measure our success against those goals.
Thank you. Reverend Trent Thornley, the Executive Director of the San Francisco Night Ministry, asks a very important question. Our night ministers walk the streets into the early morning hours every night. Most shelters are closed by the time we encounter folks. How might we coordinate with the city to immediately refer someone in high need to a shelter bed in the middle of the night?
Yeah, so late night access to emergency shelters is an ongoing challenge just because of the way that we're staffed. But we are currently piloting a late and overnight shelter access in partnership with the street crisis response team. We've not yet seen a significant demand for overnight access, but we're learning from this pilot, and we may be able to expand hours depending upon its success. And maybe what we can do is, if the San Francisco Night Ministry isn't already in touch with the street crisis response team and, doesn't have access to those resources, maybe we can make that connection so that when the night ministry is coming across people who really need shelter, they can. I heard that same issue from some of the Urban Alchemy staff when I was down in the Tenderloin the other night, and just kind of talking to people who were out there, and they were saying, like, we get people sometimes really late at night who need shelter. What can we do? And so I think we need to continue to figure out how to expand that access.
Reverend Paul Trudeau, the Chief Executive Officer of City Hope, asks two really important questions. And, I know you get a lot of tough questions put your way. I'm going to ask you to respond to these with the greatest of candor, as I know you will, because I think that sometimes the faith community needs some constructive criticism as well. In your opinion, how have faith communities of San Francisco assisted and addressed the crisis of homelessness, but also in what ways have faith communities failed our neighbors on our streets?
As I said before, faith communities can play a really important role in ending homelessness. And it can range from, as I said before, hosting the Interfaith Shelter program, raising awareness, hosting drives for food and clothes, hosting safe parking programs, and developing affordable housing on property, and then advocating with us for new shelters and housing. I think the other really important thing is that communities and faith communities can educate themselves about homelessness and the root causes of homelessness and the inequities that make people homeless and that cause a lot of the other traumas that we see on the street. I think it's really easy to other people who are on the street, when you're walking down the street and you see somebody acting differently, or even just somebody in a tent, you're never sure about what's going on there. And I think the more that we educate ourselves about what's really happened to people and why they are where they are, the more that we're people of faith and we're able to respond as people of faith. And I think that's something that we always need to keep in mind. And sometimes I do hear from communities, faith communities, where they're like, just get these people out of my way. And I think that, the way I was raised is that, this is our community, and this is something that we all need to engage in. And so I really do look forward to having more conversations about how we as a department and we as a city can engage with our faith communities in the city. There's a lot of power and there's a lot of faith, there's a lot of empathy and care in our faith communities. And as you mentioned earlier, Michael, we have 800 plus faith communities. We have the power to do a lot to address this issue together.
Thank you. And his related question, which I think you just answered, is how can faith communities address and counter the prevailing NIMBY attitudes of many San Franciscans? Not in my backyard.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing pretty much, but we're also a funding entity, and we regularly issue RFPs for funding opportunities. I know that there are a number of nonprofits, and there are a number of nonprofits that are faith-based nonprofits that we already do contract with, but I think that there could be opportunities for other faith communities who are not really part of our system yet to actually start some new programs. And so we encourage you to keep an eye out for all of those opportunities. And we can also really provide technical assistance to faith communities to kind of figure out what the right place is in the movement to help end homelessness. So we are a resource for that and want to continue to be.
Sometimes I think when we're in the eye of the hurricane, all we can see are the problems. I remember vividly being out at the shipyard, and I think it was either 2014 or 2015, Mayor Lee gave a State of the City address, and he talked about every wave of people who's ever come to San Francisco. from the 49ers, and he just enumerated them all. He said what they all had in common was none of them were ever welcomed here. And I thought that that was very profound. And right now in our country, we are seeing laws being passed that are making it difficult for people to be their authentic selves and to live safely. And I just have this gut feeling that San Francisco is in the process of recreating itself right now, and that there are going to be people that are going to come here. And that's going to exacerbate a lot of what we're trying to do right now. How do you feel that we can welcome those who will come in the new wave?
Well, I think if we're talking about people, San Francisco has always been a mixed bag there. There are numbers of people, and there are numbers of faith communities that really do reach out and support people who are coming here, whether they're immigrants or whether they're people coming to be their authentic selves, right? One of the things that we know is, I think it's 30% of the young adult population of people experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQIA plus. Some of those young people probably grew up in San Francisco, but people come to cities because they feel like they can be their authentic selves and they can be out, right? And so, I think it's our responsibility to welcome them and to really think about what they need. And I, just want to reiterate that the ways that the faith community can be involved is to come out and speak on behalf of our new shelter and housing programs, educate your congregations or your faith communities about new housing and shelter proposals, and join public meetings and hearings and community dialogue about about the projects, and make sure that you really understand what's happening. And then, I think, Michael, I remember when I was at Department of Disability and Aging Services, we did some work on educating the faith communities on ageism and all that stuff. Remember that?
Yes.
I think we can do some similar projects, and our team is really happy to help with that, so that, maybe you create a day when you're messaging about homelessness and what the actual stats are and who actually experiences homelessness and why it's an equity issue and all of those things. I honestly think a lot of people don't understand. So we are happy to work with you to figure out any of those things and any of those strategies.
We are conveners, and we are those who build relationships. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. When you sit down at the table, when you break bread with those who are in need, that's when you can really see the possibilities. And I just want to let you know, Shireen, that it is in our DNA not only to pray for you, but to work with you. And we will continue to, as we have. And I just want to say a special heartfelt thank you for your presence here today, for your work. And I'm hopeful for San Francisco. I love our city. And I believe the people on this call do as well as the 5,600 e-subscribers who will receive this by day's end today, the recording link. This is just the beginning of a conversation. We're here to collaborate and work together. Thank you.
Thank you. It's such an honor.
Okay.
To be with you today.
Well, this brings to a close today's programming. We ask you to join us on the 20th of October when we welcome Institute on Aging specialist Ali Chu, who will address the pressing issue of elder abuse. And for those of us in the communities of faith, these are vulnerable populations that find value and safety and meaning in life in our congregations. And so we would invite you all to tune in then, and have a beautiful rest of your week. To our Jewish sisters and brothers who are observing the high holy days, we wish you every blessing, and look forward to seeing you on October 20th.